Almost there. Okay. Good. All right, so we're now live there. And we're going to begin. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Kitetse, and you can find it. In fact, I'm just going to pin my video so you can see. You can find Parsha. Oh, I'm also going to just mute everyone. Sorry. Okay, there. I've just muted everyone. Okay, so Parshas Kitetse is a biggie. It's a big parasha. It's got some very, very heavy concepts and ideas. We're still, of course, in the book of Devarim, which is the 5th book. And remember, we're still in that final set of speeches from Moshe before he dies and before the Jewish people go into Egypt. Into Israel. Now, this week's Parsha also has, and it's interesting, we've got, over the last few weeks, we've had these really high numbers. This week's Parsha has a total of 74 mitzvot in it. So this week was 74. Last year was a dip down. I think it was just below 50. And the week before that was just above 50. So if you think about it, in these three Parshiot, we have, and then the week before, I think as well was quite high. We have over a fifth, I think, just in the last four Parsha, 1/5 of the 613 mitzvot in these four. Now there are 5 books of Moses, and we've got a fifth of all the commandments of the 613 in these weeks, and they also happen to be extremely important to life. A lot of the other mitzvot can be found in the book of Vayikra. Vayikra is called the Teres Kohanim. Teres Kohanim means the Torah of the priests. And the reason why it's given that name is because so much of the book of Vayikra relates to the laws around the temple service. So practically speaking, many of those laws were actually only acted on and delivered by a select group of people, i.e. the Kohanim and the Levim, the priests and the Levites. In fact, more specifically, the priests and the high priest. But that doesn't mean we don't have the obligation to those mitzvot. It just means we, on a personal level, don't necessarily need to do them. But they need to be done. So a mitzvah is not necessarily what we as individuals do, but it's also what we as a collective do. So a very practical way of framing that is there is no temple right now in Jerusalem. That means that there are hundreds of laws, mitzvot, that can't be fulfilled. There are hundreds of opportunities to create spiritual meaning in this world that can't be fulfilled. And the obligation to build a temple falls on everyone, and the obligation to protect the temple falls on everyone. So as long as there's no temple for the Kohanim to be completing their service, it's actually a lacking in all of us, not just the Kohanim. So not necessarily do all mitzvot relate to all people, but all people are required to be able to create the environment for mitzvot to be done. So this week's Parashas Kitetse has, again, and I just, by way of disclaimer to Elizabeth, I'm going to be leaving out not just the majority. I'm going to be leaving out 10 times the amount that we're actually including in today's discussion. I know. I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. So what I've tried to do is choose the topics this week that kind of come through the beginning, middle, and the end of the parasha, just so we have that, I don't know, psychological sense of achievement that, oh, we went through quite a few different parts of the parasha, but know that we are not doing this parasha any justice, and we don't really do the parasha any justice, but at least we can take some glimmers of context and meaning out of these parashas. So this week, I'd like to open up with attitudes towards talent. Talent. Attitudes towards challenge. It's a talent if you have the right attitude towards challenge. And I have selected this parasha, this particular topic, because it is timeless, but it is also particularly relevant in today's climate of particularly for us in Melbourne, being in a situation of prolonged lockdown. And as a result, the challenge of the lockdown is very, very much real and very acute. Now, the truth is, the challenges of coronavirus and COVID impact everyone in the world, because whether or not uh, you're feeling the direct impact of the illness, or you're feeling the secondary, which is almost the primary for many people, the secondary impact of the economic fallout of the situation that we're in right now. Whatever it is, I think we would be describing elements of our life and many aspects of our life as being challenging. I'm not one to say, in fact, I'm quite against the idea of saying it's not a challenge because compared to other eras, there were real challenges. It is a challenge, and it is a challenge in context of the lives that we live now, and it is a challenge in context of the natural, simple way of living, the simple natural way of living, and the natural qualities that every human has are being challenged. And therefore, it's not actually just get on with it. We're designed to be able to naturally cope with a whole lot of things, but then we all move into situations that require further training and upskilling, and they do take a toll. And just because we don't have mass murder taking place, and because we don't have extermination, and I am referring to the Holocaust because that often comes up in conversations particularly informed by Jewish guilt, just because that's not happening doesn't mean that the challenge isn't real. It just means it may not be as crisis-like as those, but challenge is challenge, and can be different levels of intensity. So we are living in a time of challenge, and I feel that this parasha has a very, very interesting message. So I'm going to begin right at the beginning of the parasha, Parashas Kiseitze, which is chapter 21 of the book of Devarim, and it starts with Pasuk Yud, the 10th verse of this parak. And so, as I pointed out last week, Prokim are not something that were created by the rabbis, and therefore they don't neatly align with the beginning and end of different parashas. So, this parasha begins with the words Kiseitze lamelchama alevecha unasonei Hashem lekecha biyadecha v'shavisa shivyoi. If you go out to wage a non-obligatory war, which is that little detail of whether it's obligatory or non-obligatory doesn't really have as much importance for today's conversation, but it is important in context of the different laws of the Torah. So when you go to wage war on your enemies, Hashem, your God, delivers them into your hand, and so on and so forth. And then it goes on to talk about attitudes when fighting, and the laws around war. And there are a lot of wars around war in the Torah. Now, there is a classic question asked here. Kiseitze lamelchama, it should be im oivecha, with your enemies. When you go out to war with your enemies, not when you go to war on. You don't, if I were to ask you, have you had an argument in the last month with someone? You would say, yes, I've had an argument. I wouldn't say, who did you have an argument on? I would ask you, who did you have an argument with? If a child comes home from school and says, I got into a fight, you'll say, what? What happened? The child will say, I had a fight with so-and-so, not I had a fight on. In fact, if anyone used the word on, said, I had a fight on someone, or I had an argument on someone, we would correct them and say, that's not the correct English. That's not correct grammar. You have a fight with. You wage war with. You have an argument with someone. But the Torah doesn't use that word. Now, we know that the Torah is very, very precise in the language that it uses. And even if you want to follow the opinion that I referred to, I think it was in this in this group. Even if you want to refer to the famous argument about the Torah, whether every word and every letter has a critical meaning, or whether the words and letters are not as important as the general message. And while, yes, both opinions will hold these are the words of Hashem to Moshe, one opinion, which is not the prevailing opinion, is that Hashem chose words which would allow people to understand the message, whereas the prevailing opinion, which is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, is that not just did Hashem use the language that people would be able to relate to, but was extremely deliberate with every letter and every word, like Hashem was deliberate also with the general message, but is deliberate because there are specific lessons to be learnt out from every word and every letter. That is the prevailing position as found in most Talmudic arguments, and definitely the position as we find in the evolution of Jewish law throughout the ages. So the choice of word of...
I just want to ask a question. Isn't it true that the scopes of Jewish words are not, the Hebrew words are the same as those of English, and that in fact al can be translated against in some cases quite legitimately rather than on?
It is possible that it can be used, but it's not how the Torah normally does. The Torah doesn't normally use the word al for with. So if we're looking at language generally for as found in the Torah, this would not be. The Torah does use different ways. Either will use a prefix or it will use the word im. So because of the Torah's usage, we can ask this question. So while in isolation, you're right, words can be used in a word can be used with a slightly different meaning. For consistency in the Torah, the question remains legitimate. So that is a good point, but I'll continue with this line. So the Torah's choice of using the word al is must provide us with the opportunity to learn a whole lot of things out. One is, if we go with the literalism, while it is poor grammar, the literal meaning of the word al, meaning on, provides us with a very, very interesting attitude, which is that when we go out to fight with the enemy, we must not see them as an equal. When you say you engage with, there is some level of equality. There might be a stronger and a weaker. There might be a superior and an inferior. But when you say on, it's not only superior and inferior, it is a completely different league. On means there is clearly one that sits above and will always sit above that which is below. So if I would give you an example, if my 8-year-old son had the opportunity to go and play a bit of football with his favorite player at the Collingwood Football Club, they would not be playing with each other. The football player would be coming down to my son's level. They are not equals. It's not that one is better than the other. They are in completely different leagues. In fact, their leagues don't even relate to one another. The word on indicates not only superiority, but a complete superiority. There is nothing that actually unites them. My son can't come up to the level of competition. He can't be a lousy competitive partner because he has nothing on a football player, and the football player has to leave the realm of talent and football that he has in order to play football with my son. That's just how it is. So what the Torah is saying here is that when you approach war, don't for a second think that you go to war with. Go to war on. Realize that you're coming from a completely different position. If you are going to war, there is a very, very specific reason why. And there are only a few reasons why war is ever permitted. the number one is to take what is rightfully yours. So the Jewish people had to wage the wars to conquer the land of Israel because the inhabitants of Israel did not want Israel to come in and settle. We asked them to leave. We asked them to just stand aside. They didn't agree, so we had to fight. Okay, so it's like if someone comes to your house and they're there to rob you, you can ask them to leave. You can say, I'd like you to leave now. You can call the police. The police say, we'll be there in 10 to 50 minutes, whatever. Um, you may have to take things into your own hands. That's one reason why one goes to war. Another reason to go to war is for necessary expansion or to prevent an enemy from attacking first. So you have the obligation of war, and then you have wars that are permitted. A permitted war means that the king wants to initiate a war, but doesn't have the legal pretense as specified explicitly in the Torah, and therefore requires the spiritual permission, and that would happen via the priest and by the high priest and a prophet, which I'm not going to get into right now. That's the difference between an obligatory and non-obligatory war. And I don't want to really get into that because that's beyond the pale of our conversation. What I'm talking about here is the attitude. When you're going into that war, you have to realize that whether it has been permitted or whether it is obligated, it is not you that goes to war. You, as a conduit of Hashem's will in this world, are acting on the requirement on you as a person in this world. And therefore, you come from a place of doing this because this is what Hashem wants, and therefore you are part of the mastery of the world. You are on top, not a part of. And therefore, when you go into it with that attitude, the Pasuk says, Hashem will deliver you. Hashem will fight. It's not if, then. It's that is what happens. When you become a conduit for Hashem's blessing, when you become a conduit for Hashem's will, Hashem is the one that then does whatever it is that is required. So actually, although it is being fought by people, it is actually just being played out. And this is the expression of how Hashem overcomes that which needs to be overcome. So now let's move that away from the biblical narrative and let's move it away from war and let's talk about our life. There are two ways to approach challenge in life. One is subjective and one is objective. So to look at challenge subjectively in life is to say, I am I, and the challenge is obstructing me, from progressing forward. It is, I am I, and it is detracting from me. I am I, and this thing is challenging me. So whatever that challenge is, whether external or internal, whether physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, whatever, if you are you and the other is then countering you, then you're going to have a problem. Meaning you are the master of your own destiny, you define what is right and wrong, you want something or you don't want something, and this thing is either preventing you or it is forcing you, and therefore it's you versus it, you versus them. Then you're going to struggle. Whichever one is stronger is going to win. However, if you don't see yourself as an individual into yourself, but rather, I am here to achieve that which Hashem wants of me, and it seems like something is trying to obstruct that which Hashem wants in this world, then when you approach that challenge, it's not you approaching it. It's not the egocentric self that's approaching. It's the altruistic, humble self that approaches it, saying, it's not about the fact that it bothers me. It's that what Hashem wants it doesn't seem to be able to be fulfilled. I'm going to have to overcome this. So let's play this out in some practical examples. Money. So one of the biggest challenges in life is having a shortage of money. If you don't have enough money, it really keeps you up at night. It makes you hungry in your belly, and it consumes you. Now, if it's I'm hungry, I'm poor, I am short of money, then we begin to resent and be angry at whatever it is that we see as being the cause of that state. We also will possibly be more susceptible to taking steps to doing things that are possibly unethical or illegal in order to procure money, because it's me, my situation, and what I need versus the situation that is keeping me or placing me in this situation, and because me versus them. And that becomes a very, very terrible tension, because more often than not, we can't necessarily change everything around us. We have to respond to it, but we can't necessarily change. We become a fighter. If, however, we say, Hashem, I need money. I want money because if I have $1 million, I can give so much more charity. Hashem, I need money because I feel I need to live in a house that's this size or an apartment that's furnished in this way. I feel that my children need access to da 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 da. This is what I feel. Then again, it's like the first. It's what you feel. However, if it's Hashem, you want me to keep kosher. Hashem, you want me to give my children a Jewish education. Hashem, you want me to give 10% charity. I just don't see where I'm going to get that money from. So if you go with that attitude, then it becomes a situation of where you say, Hashem, I'd love to give charity. I'd love to put my children in a Jewish school, but there's just not enough money for that. I'd love to be involved in communal work, but I've got a leaky roof that keeps me up at night. I just don't seem to have the headspace. So you now have placed yourself in the category of, you realize that your life is about what Hashem wants of you in this world. Then we go a step further. Say, Hashem, I understand I'm meant to do these things. I don't seem to have the capacity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. And my best is not defined by what I deem to be the best, but I'm going to do my best according to what Torah says is my obligation in this moment. If I don't have enough money for everything, what does Torah tell me I need to do? What is my priority of where I should spend my money? Do I give charity? Do I pay school fees? Do I buy lulav and etrog? What do I do? And Torah will give a priority. It'll say, this is where you put your effort. Let me give you a different example. Haven't found love. I live alone. Haven't been able to fulfill that beautiful mitzvah of procreation, of shalom bayit, of having a peaceful home, of finding one's soulmate. So I know Hashem wants me to, and I want to, but it just doesn't seem to have happened. So what does halacha tell me? What levels of initiative do I need to take? Have I taken those initiatives? If yes, Hashem, I'm doing my best. What happens is, in these situations, we are partnering, and I know I've really minimized these very serious things, but I'm partnering with Hashem, and I'm saying, Hashem, I'm not allowing these things to break me down. I'm just reporting to you that I seem to be in a pickle here, and I will do my best. I will do my best, not because I've given up. I will do my best because what Shulchan Aruch says, what the Jewish tradition says to do, is what I'm doing. And what the Torah says here, if that's the attitude you take, then Hashem says, I'm going to take care of it. Now you notice that it doesn't go in and say, and then whatever it is that you're fighting for, you're going to get. It doesn't say that. The next part of the pasuk says, I will deliver them into your hand, and you will seize their captives. Okay. So it says that things will happen. It doesn't say what you want will happen. It doesn't say, I will make sure no one dies. I will make sure this happens. It says that the ultimate goal of why you went out to war, if you go on, as in you don't engage with, but you're coming from a place of, I am doing this because Hashem said so, then Hashem will deliver that which needs to be delivered, and you will be a part of achieving that. It doesn't mean we'll go unscathed. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have challenge. But what it means is that when we look back, we will see that there is fruition from what we have achieved. From what we have tried to, there will be fruition from what we are trying to achieve. And that is what the parasha is saying. So what we must do, what is our approach to challenge, is not see the challenge as something that is confronting us, but we must see the challenge as something that seems to be preventing the will of Hashem from being carried out, and I need to do whatever it is that I can do in order to go past it. So I want to finish with an idea called L'chatchila Riba, which is from the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the idea of L'chatchila Riba is that when you see a hurdle in front of you, when you see an obstruction in front of you, some people will try to go around it. Some people will try to crawl under it. And the Rebbe Marash said what you need to do is charge towards it and leap over it. Be like, I can't leap over it. It's in my way. So as long as you're saying, I can't leap over it, it's you versus it. However, if you say, there is an obstruction, I don't know about this obstruction. Hashem wants me to be down the path. I am going to charge towards it and I'll leap above it. I will go over it. I don't need to work out all the technical ways of how this is going to help. If I have legs, I can leap. Of course, you've got to do it within reason, but you can't be over-calculating to the point that you're paralyzed, and you can't be overly cautious to the point that you're going to go around, because you're going to go around and you're going to slip down the cliff face. You're going to go under and it might slip and crush you. Sometimes you need to scale that mountain, not go around it. If the Torah says do it now, you do it now. If the Torah says do it, but I don't know, I haven't got the money, I don't know. The Torah says, I didn't ask if you have the money, I said do it. Then you do it. And that attitude of L'chatchila Riba is, I'm doing what Hashem wants, I'm going over. I want to just finish with a story in this part. It's a famous story with Reb Meir Premish Lana, who was a very, very interesting character in Hasidic history. Reb Meir Premish Lana, even when he was an older man, used to ensure that he went to the mikveh every day. And we're talking about in the old country, in Ukraine. And so in winter, going to the mikveh for a man was to immerse in a lake or river. In winter, the lakes and rivers would freeze over. So Reb Meir Premish Lana used to go up a mountain, a hill, and then he'd go down the other side where the lake was. Now, everyone knew Reb Meir Premish Lana in the dead of winter would go up these icy sides and down, and then he would break the ice and he'd immerse in the water. And there were people that said, impossible. He's in his 60s, in his 70s, impossible that is doing that. He's going out for a morning walk, no one knows where he's going, and he comes back a couple hours later, and everyone thinks, oh, the righteous man went to the mikveh. And so two detractors decide to follow him to debunk this myth of Reb Meir Premish Lana going mikveh in the icy water. And so they followed him. And they watched and they followed him go up an icy slope, and then down the other side, down an icy slope. And as they followed him from afar, they were slipping and they were sliding and really, really hurt themselves. Really badly. When they returned back into Premish Lana after a couple hours, Reb Meir Premish Lana hadn't noticed them, and he's carried on unscathed. And we've got these two young guys who have slipped and slid, and they're all bruised, and they're embarrassed. People are like, did you debunk Reb Meir? Like, no, we kept falling over. And they approached Reb Meir and asked, how is it that you in your 60s and 70s are able to walk up this icy mountain and down the other side and break the ice and immerse in a river or a lake? And we are slipping and sliding. We're young, we're fit, we couldn't do it. What is it? What's your secret? And Reb Meir said, it's very simple. When you're connected above, you don't slip below. Meaning, if it was about doing it because you want to do it, okay, then you're left to your own abilities. If you're unable, you're going to slip and slide. However, when you're connected to above, when this isn't about you, this is about the higher cause, and this is about what is expected of you, then you don't slip, you don't slide, and all sorts of things take place. So Reb Meir wasn't saying, I had an easy walk, I don't get cold when I go in the water. He was saying, I don't slip and fall. I'm putting the effort, I'm connected above, it's my attitude. I'm doing this because that's what's wanted of me. I don't do it because of personal gain or ego. And that is the idea of al oivecha, to be on top of, to be above, and not to be engaged with. Any questions before we move to the next topic for today? Okay. So I want to get to political correctness. Throughout this parsha, there are a number of different laws that don't directly link to one another. We've got laws around, in chapter 22, we've got laws around the defamation of a married woman. Then later in the parsha, we've got ideas around modesty. Later again, we've got laws around converts, widows, and orphans, and how they have to be treated, as well as paying wages to employees on time. And then lastly, right before the end of the parasha, we've got administering lashes. You'd be like, what is the connection between widows, orphans, and converts, and how we treat them, and then how we give out lashes in a time of punishment? What does that seem to have to do at all with employees' rights and paying on time? What does that have to do with the laws of modesty? It seems like uh, uh, a real cholent of disconnected ideas. Now, while I'm just going to have a drink, one sec. While all of those topics do have their own set of while they all have their own set on of laws and implications, and they are their own subjects, there are some underlying principles that come across in the halachas, in all the traditions and all the laws and all the ways to conduct oneself that are involved here. I don't want to get into what is the history of political correctness and what does political correctness mean. I want to talk about what political correctness means to the average person and what it's doing in society. Political correctness is very much an attitude that demands of people to be cautious and to regulate one's speech and behaviors according to what may offend or what may exclude others, whether it's an individual or a group. It demands of us that we take the feelings of others and the way that we're behaving and its impact on others, we should take that on board to recalibrate the way we speak and the way we behave. It's led to two things. Political correctness has led to two things. One, it has led to an increased sensitivity in society. Two, it has led to an absolute aggravation in society. It has led to frustration, resentment, and it has even caused an increase in antisocial behavior, because there is a group that feel that their right to express themselves however they want is being impinged, and they resist against that. Now, before you jump down my throat and say, Menachem, did you just blame the victim? Not at all. Let me finish my sentence. It has also, I said, it has driven an increased sensitivity. We've become more aware of how we speak and how we impact. So it seems that political correctness is driving a double-edged sword. It is causing more problems, and it is also causing an improvement in society. So political correctness is interesting. Political correctness has some very, very, very serious problems, and historically those problems go a lot further than keyboard warriors on social media. Those problems are linked to many of the downsides associated with communism. But I'm not going to get into that because that's part of the history of political correctness. Sensitivity to another is one of the underlying things that comes up in all the listed sets of mitzvot that I just shared. The Torah seems to be very concerned for the feelings of others and the way we make people feel through our actions and the way we treat them. To the point that the Torah wants certain aspects of people's dignity enshrined in the 613 mitzvot. As a result, what the Torah is saying is you have a moral obligation and you have a Torah obligation to be sensitive to other people's needs and other people and the impact of your behavior on other people. On the other hand, though, the Torah doesn't seem to list to what degree. The Torah doesn't seem to tell us which minorities are worthy of being concerned for. What the Torah does say are things like widows, orphans, converts. You got to include them. You got to be mindful of them. So what is it that the Torah wants us to take out of that? So it's actually not that complicated. It's only complicated when you start to overcomplicate it. People who are naturally disadvantaged, and there are people who are naturally disadvantaged. People who are naturally disadvantaged need to be cared for. So the Torah seems to say that someone who is not going to be automatically included in the kahal, they're not going to be automatically included in the community, because the community, by natural behavior of how social structures work, the community will naturally not consider them. Why wouldn't you consider them? So let me give you an example. A convert will be easily excluded because they do not have the natural ability to break into constructs in a community. They're not born into a family who are connected to the next family. They don't come to shul where there are people who knew their parents. They don't have an ancestral connection with the society they've chosen to live amongst. And therefore, they are automatically disadvantaged because of the way communities organically evolve. An orphan is disadvantaged because the natural caregivers that a child would have don't exist. Further, the social support that a child has, and a child is not just a little child, a child can be in their 30s or 40s, especially when it comes to social support. In the natural length of days that a person has in this world, we are designed that we can rely on parents for a whole lot of different things, and we're equipped that when they die, when we're in our 50s and 60s, that we can transition. It's very, very different when a teenager or a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old loses their parents at an early age, depending on the era, and therefore they are naturally disadvantaged because they don't have the emotional support that a person would normally have. A widow is a person who, for most of history, relied on her husband for income. And so naturally, we didn't walk around going, oh, women need money. No, we said women will have money because they get married and they've got a husband, and the husband will earn and provide for them. So you don't naturally look at a woman and go, oh, she needs money. You don't naturally look at a child and say, oh, they need emotional support. You don't naturally look at a convert and say, oh, they've got no ancestry. Because it's so natural for us to have those things. Those are part of our subconscious. This in the modern world is called privilege. This is not privilege in the Torah. It is something to be thankful for, but it is something that you can take for granted as having. Now, we should never take things for granted, full stop. We should be thankful that this is the norm. The Torah says, people, because of how you're wired, it's quite easy to forget and to not be aware that there are people who aren't necessarily in the same position as you. And we want you to be mindful of their needs. We want you to be mindful of their needs. And their needs mean ensuring that they are included in community, ensuring that they have financially what they require, and ensuring, okay, now when I say ensuring they're involved in community, it doesn't just mean make sure that they're part of the party. It's that when Pesach comes, make sure that they're part of the Korban Pesach. It's when Yom Tov comes, make sure that they are included in the minyan, in the kohol, so that they can do the chiyuv required of them, the obligation that they have. When we talk about an employee, if you have an employee, so you may assume that they're living their life. You have your money, they have theirs. But you have to remember, if you have an employee, the Torah's assumption is you're more financially well off. And you have to realize that not everyone is in the same financial position. Don't be late with paying. If you're in a better financial position and people are a day late with paying you, look, hey, never, don't worry, you get another day. But for someone who's not in your position, that grace is not something that you can just count on. But you have to be mindful of that. What the Torah is saying is to be mindful of the disadvantage that exists, so that they can live in a way of dignity. It doesn't mean you have to give them your life. It means you have to ensure that the chiyuvim, the obligations that you have, and that the obligations that they have can all be met. Now, there is a halacha around individuals and the kahal. Generally, the kahal in Judaism comes first. The community comes first. Let me give you a couple examples of how we see the kahal comes first in halacha. So first, the example of the cold room. If it's the middle of winter and the windows of a room are wide open and everyone inside is hot, they say, well, we want to leave the windows open. And someone walks in and says, it's freezing in here. I put on my coat and I'm still freezing. I've taken the basic steps to stay warm. It's freezing. I need you to close the windows. They are not allowed to stop that person from closing the windows because it's cold and this person's cold, and the fact that they're hot gets ignored. In summer, if everyone's sitting in a room and it's boiling hot and they've got the windows closed and they've got the air conditioning off, and someone walks in and says, it's boiling in here, and everyone says, no, it's not too hot, it's beautiful. That person has the right to open the window even though no one else wants it open. That is an example of where the individual, their individual opinion dominates the group. But let's make it the inverse. If it's the middle of winter and it's cold and the heating is on and everyone's cold and needs that heat, and someone walks in and they've just been out for a run, they go, oh, it's so hot in here, it's stuffy. I'm opening the windows. Everyone says, don't. That individual has to suffer. Either sit in a hot room or go wait outside until you cool down. Likewise in summer, if everyone's in the room and the windows are open or the air conditioning is on and someone goes, oh, it's freezing in here, they do not have the right to turn off the air conditioning. So what we see here is that you don't automatically get precedence just because you're in a disadvantaged position. It depends a lot on what the Torah deems to be normal. And therefore, it's not the right of an individual to say, you must do what I want because what you're doing excludes me, offends me. The Torah lays out when is exclusive behavior wrong, and when is exclusive behavior pragmatically going to have to be ignored. The Torah says take an attitude of sensitivity, but when it comes to halacha, sometimes that sensitivity can't dominate what is required. The way political correctness is currently delivered is there is no relativism. There is no measure of when is it too far. If it offends, that's it. The subjective opinion of one defines so many things for the populace. What Torah is saying is no. Sometimes we always have to be sensitive, and sometimes that sensitivity needs to be acted on by the majority, and sometimes that sensitivity does not need to be acted on by the majority. And what we have here are laws around sensitivity, not laws around political correctness. If you want to, and we actually have to take case by case. The Torah doesn't have general sweeping laws. We have to take case by case. So equal opportunity, we have to look at what is the situation, and halacha will determine whether there's an exclusive behavior or not. The person saying I feel excluded doesn't necessarily mean that they are being excluded. Or vice versa. If everyone's happy with the status quo, halacha says not necessarily is the status quo acceptable. If the status quo is you try to pay on time, but no, there's a normal grace, you can always be a couple days late. If everyone says that's okay, the Torah says no, it's not. Don't care if everyone says it's okay. If everyone says, oh, the widow seems okay, the orphan seems okay, that's all right. The Torah says, no. If they're not able to do A, B, and C, we don't care if you think they're okay. So political correctness in the way it's being delivered now is not the way that Torah wants sensitivity to be explored. Rather, we need to look at case by case, and we need to take an attitude of sensitivity. And we then need to look at the majority, the needs of the majority versus the individual, and we'll look at specific cases as to whether or not the majority needs to bend or not. Any questions on that before we move to the last topic, which is a short one, but a powerful one? Any questions?
Well, what if somebody who has been jailed for an offence says, I should have the same freedoms as everybody else? I mean, that sort of is, they're out of, they don't have the freedom, but because they did something.
So the question to me is just it's just coloring in the variables. To me, I don't really see how that's any different to any individual saying it's my right or I want to be entitled to something. Either you are entitled or you're not entitled according to Torah. The fact that someone says it's my right doesn't mean it is their right. Now, where we're going to see a serious conflict in this is the conflict exists between Torah and Western society. So in Western society, generally, the individual's right is the most important thing. It's and we see this exemplified in American society: the right to this, the right to that. The Torah doesn't say anyone has the right to anything. In fact, you generally find in Torah there are no rights; there are only obligations. You are obligated to do this. You are obligated to do that. This is how you do it. This is what you do. So in Torah, you don't really get someone standing up and saying, it's my right. The Torah says, it's not your right. What's your obligation and what's our obligation? So if a person says, I'm in prison, it's my right, the Torah says, right, if you're in prison, there's a law that says why you're in prison, and there are laws that state how to govern a person who's in prison, or how a person who is in prison needs to govern themselves. If they want something, and the Torah says actually that person should be given it, give it to them. You're not allowed to withhold. If that person says, I want something, the Torah says, you don't get that, they can knock on the doors until morning. They're not going to get it. So the individual's proclamation of rights does not necessarily entitle them to the thing that they want in Torah. Does that address what you're saying?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Cool. All right. The last topic for today is destroying self-doubt. This week's parsha, Kiseitze Lamelchama, I am jumping right back to the beginning of the parsha, talks about war, as I said. Now, that's the beginning of the parsha. If we go to the very end of the parasha, so the beginning of the parasha starts when you go out to war. That's for a permitted war. The end of the parasha talks about one of the obligatory wars, which is the war against Amalek, or the war on Amalek. Amalek was a nomadic nation. At different points they held different pieces of land. But Amalek in Judaism is everything in Judaism is a concept. Everything in Judaism is an object. Everything in Judaism has a personification. Everything in Judaism is a number. Everything in Judaism is an energy. So Judaism's got this really cool way of looking at everything. So Amalek is a nation. Amalek is also a concept. Amalek is a person. Amalek is an attitude. So let's talk about the nation. It was a nomadic group of people. I tend to call them land pirates. They were land-based pirates. They would roam the countrysides and the cities, and they would pillage, they would take over. And they have a public enemy number one to Amalek is the Jewish people. And public enemy number one of the Jewish people is Amalek. The Torah is very, very clear. You are not allowed to make peace with Amalek. You have to destroy them. No amount of peace. No peace deals with them. It's the only nation that the Torah says you must wipe them off the face of this earth. Now, if you're looking at this from a humanist point of view, it's like, oh my God, how could it be? So let me use some really strong language. Amalek. I want you not to see Amalek as just a group that have a disagreement with the Jews. Amalek, as the Torah defines them, Amalek is a nation of SS. SS men, SS women, and SS children. So I want you to imagine an SS man in 1941, romantically infatuated with his SS girlfriend. They get married. Both are sworn to Hitler's ideal. Both are committed to the destruction of the Jewish people. Both have signed up to be part of the SS and thoroughly enjoy the process of killing and extermination. And if you think this is nonsense, Just listen to any German man, any man or any woman who was the victim of the SS. My grandmother was in Auschwitz. My great uncle was in Auschwitz. One was in the woman's side, one was in the man's side. My grandmother talks about these bulldog SS women that would beat them with joy. My great uncle talks about these SS men that would beat them with joy. My grandmother also talks about the SS men that would beat them with joy. It's not a male thing. You have SS men, you have SS women. They get married, they have a child. What do they raise? An SS child. You might be, wow, we're condemning children before they've even lived life. In case of Amalek, the Torah says yes. And the fact that the Torah does that means that one should assume that a child should be always given the benefit of the doubt, unless Hashem says not. And in the case of Amalek, Hashem says, no. Amalek is not just a hateful person. Amalek is a person who, in essence, their soul type is so dark that they do not have the ability to exercise free choice. They are like compulsive. They have a psychiatric condition that makes them hate Jewish people. Now, it's very hard to identify who is Amalek. So Hashem does that when the Jews are traveling in the desert, says, that's Amalek. Throughout the Tanakh, Hashem says, that's Amalek. Nowadays, we don't know who Amalek is. Since the era of the prophets, we don't know who Amalek is. There are no distinguishers. We don't even say, we say colloquially that the Nazis are Amalek, but was every person who's a member of the SS Amalek? Probably, but you don't know. So generally, no one would walk around killing, if you had a gun in 1943 Germany and you were Jewish, you didn't have the right, according to halacha, to take the child of an SS couple and shoot him and say, it's Amalek. You don't have the right. You can kill an SS man. You can kill an SS woman. They're involved in the extermination. They're involved in crimes against humanity. Kill them in the context of war. But you can't take their child and kill them. Amalek in the Torah, Hashem says, men, women, children, animals, kill them. And if you're not bothered by that, there's something wrong with you. And if you are bothered by it, Baruch Hashem, you're a normal human being. The reason why the Torah gives us the instruction is because we should be bothered by it. King Saul was bothered by it and could not act on it. He couldn't act on it. And the prophet Samuel tells him off. But if we look at King Saul, he's a natural. He's not just a natural, he's a great guy. And he couldn't emotionally bring himself to killing all of them. It is a very hard mitzvah. So wrestle with it. 100%. Be bothered by it. Amalek has the same numerical value as the Hebrew word safek. Safek, the numerical value is 260. Samach is 60. No, hang on. 240. Samach is 60. Pei is 80. Kuf is 100. So that's 240. 60 plus 80 plus 100 is 240. The numerical value of Ayin, Mem, Lamed, Kuf is also 240. Ayin is 70. Lamed is 30. Mem, is 40. And Kuf is 100. So 70 plus 30 plus 100 plus 40 is 240. The Hebrew word safek means doubt. Amalek is not just a nation. The tactics of Amalek were very, very evil. Amalek didn't head into war army to army, the classic way of fighting a war through most of human history. Amalek would set up an army and say, we're going to fight, and it'd be army to army, but meanwhile, they would unethically go to the back of the civilian encampment and they just mow down the women, the children, and the elderly and the sick. They would look to destroy the very morale of the nation. If you're in a fight, and you're now generally when you think about people with disability, so there's a very, very fascinating thing when it comes to disability. The parents and the family members of someone who has a disability tend to have a much deeper love, a more profound love for that person. It's a very interesting phenomena. It's really quite fascinating that there is such an overt and depth of love. In fact, it's one of the beauties of how Hashem created the world. That ability to tap into a much deeper love for a person that may need it more. So if you have a father who's on a battlefront and he finds out that his disabled family member has just been killed, if you have someone on a battlefront and they discover that their aging parent has just been killed, it's not just like any other death. It is so much more profound. And Amalek used to look for the weak side of the army and destroy it. They didn't come with brute force, army to army. They looked to manipulate and psychologically attack the Jewish people. And that was done by killing the disabled. What it did was it messed up the minds of the soldiers. What they did was they niggled their way in, and that completely would deflate the army. You can have all the strength, you can have all the machinery. If you don't have the will to fight, and you don't have the stamina to fight, you don't have the emotion, the temperament, you're done. You need that mental edge, and Amalek would destroy it. When we talk about self-doubt, it's that niggling voice that says, you can't do it. You can't do it. That, Chassidus says, is Amalek in our lives. That doubt, that safek, is Amalek. Don't engage with it. There is no negotiation with Amalek. There is no negotiation with doubt. You must destroy it. You must eradicate it. You must remove it from who you are. Self-doubt is not the same as caution. Self-doubt and caution are very, very different. Caution is this. I want to do A, B, and C. Not sure I've got the resources. Not sure I've got the ability. Okay, so do a stock take. Do you have it? Do you have the money required? Do you have the physical ability to? Look into it. If the answer is yes, go. If the answer is no, okay, be cautious. Don't do it. Self-doubt is that you have it and you're not sure you're going to succeed. Not sure. And therefore you don't act on it. It deflates you. Doubt is that everyone says, good job. One person says, bad job. And all you can do is focus on that one opinion. Self-doubt is that you have $1 million for something, and it's going to cost $500,000 to do it. And you're sitting there going, but what if I lose the other $500,000? It's all these unsubstantiated fears that debilitate us. That is Amalek. And they are real. It's a part of who we are. And the Torah says, destroy it. No matter if it comes across as a man or a woman or a child or an animal, destroy it. It will find its way into your mind, and you've got to destroy it. You've got to remove it, and don't remember it. Cast it from your memory. That is how we approach self-doubt. That is how we approach, particularly in these times, the niggling voices of negativity. Don't fight with them. Don't try to prove it wrong. What we need to do is label it and chuck it out. Because when you fight with it, going back to the beginning of the parasha, then you give it air. If your doubt says, you're not really that talented, and you go, well, it's true, I'm not always talented, but generally I do a good job. That's it. You've lost already. And the voice says, you stand a chance to lose. I don't want to hear. I stand a chance to lose. I'm doing what Hashem wants. I have every chance to win. Enough. I'm not going to navel gaze. Where did this doubt come from? What's the origin of it? Just put it out of your mind. I know putting it out of your mind is an extremely hard thing to do. That's not what this class is. I'm first setting up the attitude. And that is how we approach Amalek. Any questions on self-doubt, Amalek, and that last part of the parasha? All right. Well, then in that case, I'm going to say goodbye. Goodbye to YouTube. Let me just check if there are any questions there. Nope. And I will see you next week. Bye.